True. Let's go to Comma Green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. The drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.
Alphonse de Carterfax presents us with a map showing blacks in various places in early America. The Charus of Brazil, the Yamasee of Florida, and the Black Caribs of St. Vincent, pre-Columbian. Alonso Ponce cites them off Campeche in Mexico. River Palacio cites them off Tegucigalpa in the Nicaraguan-Honduran border. Ramon Pane speaks of them as the black gold traders. Fray Gregorio Garcia cites them off Cartagena, Colombia. A dozen Europeans, Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Columbus, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, Peter Martyr, Lopez de Gomara, Rodrigo de Colmenares, Alphonse de Carterfax, L'Abbé Brasseur de Bourbourg, Alonso Ponce, River Palacio, Ramon Pane, Fray Gregorio Garcia, seeing things that are not there.
Today, we will do a deep dive on the evidence in support of Ivan Van Sertima and completely refute the white supremacist bias from anti-African scholars who are against him. If you like what you are seeing, support the Kamjiverse channel. Join our YouTube and Patreon memberships. The links are in the description. The late Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus occupies a foundational place in African-centered historical inquiry. Its central challenge, that the Americas were not an islanded silence before 1492, but a theater of earlier transoceanic encounters that included African peoples, confronts a long-standing isolationist narrative. Predictably, that confrontation has provoked vigorous pushback from Western scholars. Among the best-known critiques is Bernard Ortiz de Montellanos. Presented as scientific rigor, his critique often functions as a gatekeeping move. Dismissive language, selective engagement with evidence, and a refusal to grapple with the cumulative, cross-disciplinary case for pre-Columbian African contact. Our task here is not to rehearse ad hominem exchanges, but to defend the substance of Van Sertima's work on three balanced fronts. Diagnose the philosophical and methodological bias behind much of the critique. Offer a point-by-point rebuttal of Montellanos' botanical arguments. Present the affirmative, cumulative case, botanical, genetic, linguistic, archaeological, nautical, and documentary that has been overlooked or minimized. Before analyzing specimens or DNA, we must understand the intellectual battlefield. Teofilo Benga frames that battlefield succinctly. Much modern opposition to African-centered histories is not only empirical, but paradigmatic, rooted in an inherited Eurocentric Hegelian teleology that historically placed Africa outside the march of the spirit. Critics operating within that frame often treat African contributions as anomalies or legitimate intrusions. Upon analyzing the work of critics like Montellano, we notice the rhetorical moves. Terms like Afrocentrists, often prefixed with extreme, serve to marginalize interlocutors before engaging their arguments. Cheikh Anta linguistic and historical work has been dismissed with epithets such as puerile or childish. Van Sertima's defense of African influence is sometimes treated as self-disqualifying. This is not neutral academic critique. This is polemic. A central part of Obenga's defense is to reveal Montellanos of intellectual dishonesty through omission. He notes that the critic relies on outdated studies while completely ignoring the work of other respected scholars who support the idea of an African presence among the Olmecs. Obenga specifically names Mexican archaeologist Alfonso Zenil Medellin, who was a founding researcher of the INAH, National Institute of Anthropology and History, and the Museum of Anthropology. Medellin wrote about the vrai negres, true negro, physical circle type among the Olmecs. Mexican anthropologist and Afro-Mexican expert Dr. Gonzalo Aguirre Beltran, who did not reject the idea of negroids or blacks among the Olmec population, and Dr. Carlo T. Egay, whose work on the Xochipala figures led him to conclude that the Olmec ancestry was probably not Mongoloid. Obenga's point is powerful. Thus, Afrocentrists are not the only ones supporting the idea of a black presence among the Olmecs. He argues that Ortiz de Montellano's selective bibliography reveals a biased agenda rather than an objective pursuit of truth. Obenga's simple, constitutional question remains: why the insults towards African researchers? Why the lack of respect, of scientific courtesy, of human politeness? African-centered scholarship, as Obenga insists, is not racism in reverse. Its goal is corrective. To know for ourselves our entire African past, to evaluate the accomplishments of our ancestors, to build the African Renaissance. To dismiss that project out of hand is to side, consciously or not, with an older intellectual colonialism. Montellano often sets up a straw man, arguing that because plant domestication timelines appear different between continents, diffusion is implausible ab initio. But Van Sertima did not claim that Old World agriculture sprang full-grown into the Olmec heartland. Rather, his claim, and the broader African-centered hypothesis, posits specific cultural, artistic, and botanical transfers occurring through human agency after local civilizations were established. Framing the debate as a contest over the earliest beginnings of agriculture is a rhetorical misdirection. Montellano frames botanical evidence as fatal to contact hypotheses. Careful analysis shows his argument rests on misreadings, selective quotations, and category errors. 3 plants have been central in the debate: cotton, banana, plantain, and the bottle gourd. Each requires separate treatment. Montellano leans on Wendell et al. To stress that New World tetraploid cottons are hybrids that originated long ago, 1 million years or more, between an Old World agenome and a New World digenome. He then treats that deep phylogenetic date as if it negates any human-mediated historical transfer. Van Sertima never claimed Africans transported a fully domesticated New World tetraploid cotton. His claim, and the defensible argument, is that Africans could have brought Old World diploid cotton, agenome progenitors such as G. herbaceum, or related planting material, which later hybridized in the Americas. The million-year age of an ancestral event does not preclude human movements of progenitor varieties and subsequent domestication events thousands, not millions, of years later. The seed viability problem proves human agency. S.G. Stevens, cited even by Montellano, demonstrated that cottonseed viability disappears after about 2 months of saltwater exposure, sufficient to effect the transport of seeds over relatively short distances, but totally inadequate for transatlantic or transpacific dispersal. That empirical fact transforms the problem. If Old World cotton genetic signatures appear in the New World, natural drift has got a plausible vector, human transportis. The Cape Verde smoking gun, historically documented, Cape Verde was uninhabited until the Portuguese discovered it, approximately 1460. By 1466, a New World cotton, G. hirsutum var. punctatum, was present in Cape Verde, introduced from Guinea. If New World cottons were established in Africa before Columbus, then transatlantic botanical exchange, at least in that direction, had already occurred. Montellano largely glosses this inconvenient datum. Gossypium gossipioids in Oaxaca, modern genetic work, Wendell et al., and subsequent analysis reveals a Mexican cotton, G. gossipioides, bearing robust phylogenetic ties to African cotton clades. Sorensen and Johannessen characterize this presence in remote Oaxaca as virtually impossible by natural means. The parsimonious explanation is human introduction. The wide web of cotton distribution. Beyond the Americas and Africa, varieties of American cotton, G. barbadense, show up in Polynesia. G. tomentosum in Hawaii shares genetic affinities with American tetraploids. The Sanskrit name Maghani for an American cotton points to early recognition of American cotton in South Asia. Taken together, cotton genetics, biogeography, and seed viability data create a coherent pattern that implicates human voyages. Montellano focuses on discrediting a single 19th century claim and the specific report of Rochebrune or of Orellana seeing bananas, a tactical blow aimed at a weak node in a broad network of evidence. The Americas preserve local words for banana plantain. For example, South American Tupi terms like Pacoba, Galibi Bakuku, which are argued to derive from West African names, e.g., Bakoko. The distribution and antiquity of these names suggest a transatlantic borrowing path distinct from post-Columbian Spanish/Portuguese terms like platano. Carl Sauer emphasized the plantain's status as an extraordinarily poor volunteer. It does not spread effectively without deliberate human planting and care. Rapid, widespread presence of plantain or banana cultivation in the Americas soon after 1492 is difficult to explain without prior, deliberate introduction in some regions. Early chroniclers Garcilaso de la Vega, José de Acosta, and others record bananas as staple crops in parts of the Americas at contact. The combination of linguistic, agronomic, and documentary evidence supplies a cumulative case that outstrips any single suspect report. When it comes to bottle gourds, both sides of this debate admit that they can and sometimes do float. Montellano sometimes uses this to claim a win, implying human agency is unnecessary. The distribution pattern argues human agency. The bottle gourd's repeated presence in inland archaeological contexts, far from likely landing points, and its absence in regions where drift would predict presence, suggests that while drift is possible, deliberate human carriage and cultivation better explain archaeological patterns. Sorensen and Johannesson, building on empirical distributions, treat the gourd's transoceanic story as a mixed case, where human agency is often the more convincing explanation. The colossal Olmec heads, with physiognomic features that some scholars read as suggestive of African traits, remain one of the most visible pieces of the debate. Critics argue stylistic or local development. Defenders see these as part of a mosaic of cultural echoes that includes botanical and technological signals of contact. Van Sertima used such iconography as part of a broader configuration of evidence, not as a sole determinant. Linguistic affinities and loanword distributions are a powerful, often underused line of evidence. The Caribbean commercial language identified early by Columbus's interpreters, referred to in some accounts as Guahanani or Gahanawa, plausibly reflects West African commercial linguistic elements. Specific plant names, place names, and loanwords preserved in Amerindian languages trace a pattern of contact and exchange. The proposed linguistic connections between Proto-Mixozoquean and Paleo-African languages, examined within the framework of Ivan Van Sertima's hypothesis of African contact with the Olmec civilization, suggests a potentially meaningful pattern of basic vocabulary correspondences that warrant further scholarly scrutiny. Van Sertima's thesis, arguing that African voyagers reached the Olmec heartland of Veracruz and Tabasco between circa 1400 to 400 BCE, leaving cultural, iconographic, and possibly linguistic traces, gains contextual relevance from the fact that Mixozoquean languages, whose reconstructed time depth aligns with the Olmec fluorescence, were historically spoken in precisely this region. Comparative data from Vickman and Paleo-African reconstructions reveal recurring parallels in stable lexical domains such as water terms, body parts, and fundamental actions, with examples such as the following. While shared phonological patterns involving nasals, plosives, sibilants, high back vowels, and glottal elements further underscore the possibility of systematic correspondences rather than isolated coincidences. Although these similarities might reflect deep-time aerial diffusion or contact phenomena consistent with Van Sertima's proposed transatlantic interactions, reinforced by broader cultural parallels between Africans and Olmecs, the alignment of linguistic, geographic, and historical factors strengthens the case for exploring Mexizoc Paleo-African parallels more rigorously through expanded morphological comparison, computational phylogenetics, and targeted searches for potential loanwords, positioning this inquiry as a viable line of investigation into early Afro-American cultural exchanges rather than a dismissible coincidence. Genetic evidence shows substantial African admixture in Mexico. We see African L0, L1, L2, L3, U6, and U175 subclades, which most Western scholars attribute to the slave trade. The presence of East African L3, H1, A2, A, and Maghrebian U6, A7, A1B indicate that some, if not all, of these genetic markers arrived in Mexico before Columbus. A series of historic accounts and documentary evidence confirms this. Columbus required African interpreters and relied on pre-existing commercial languages in the Caribbean, which suggests a West African linguistic presence or influence at first contact. Bilbao, 1513, and other conquistadors. Early European explorers repeatedly reported encountering coastal populations described as black, tall, or martial in demeanor. Descriptions that, while ambiguous, point to African presence beyond later slave importation narratives. Estevanico and African guides. Africans such as Estevanico were central figures in early Iberian explorations, acting not merely as coerced laborers, but as guides, translators, and mediators, roles that presuppose prior knowledge and networks. To move beyond possibility to plausibility, we must show that West Africa possessed the maritime technology, nautical knowledge, and institutional tradition to mount and sustain transatlantic voyages. Here, the evidence compiled by scholars such as P. Diagne and G. Diawara is ethnographic, historical, and technological. Numerous ocean-going craft are documented in infra-Saharan Africa, from the papyrus reed boats used in the Lake Chad Basin that successfully crossed the Atlantic to the timber vessels documented in the Senegambian region. Here we find the Luco, also documented as Zopoli, and the Gal, or Almeida. These were not mere river canoes. They were large, often hewn from single trunks, capable of carrying 25 to 30 people, and significant cargo. Their long, narrow profiles and sail technologies, matting or leather sails, made them seaworthy for long coastal and open ocean legs. Contemporary and near-contemporary observers compared the silhouette and rigging favorably with Iberian caravels. It is plausible that European mariners learned design features from African models. West African seafarers practiced a form of oriented celestial navigation. The Mool mariners used star markers and solar positioning, terms recorded as Delen, Bej, Sawu, Penku in regional vocabularies, to fix course and manage long passages. The Ham, priests or masters of the sea, institutionalized maritime knowledge, weather patterns, seasonal currents, trade winds, and the vital three-quarters return adjustments needed to meet the African coast homebound. West African mariners knew how to exploit the North Equatorial Current and the parallel wind corridors for westward passages and the equatorial gyres for return legs. Distances and sailing times at 80 to 100 kilometers per day place the Senegal Gulf of Mexico route in the 30 to 45-day range, consistent with the possibility of intentional voyages rather than impossible accidental drift. Accounts of Mansa Bakari II circa 1312, sending a large fleet across the Atlantic. The so-called Voyage of Bakari II are often dismissed as legend, but they align with a broader West African maritime tradition. The Corridor of Bakari II, the North Equatorial Corridor exploited by Senegambian mariners, was a navigational reality that Columbus later tried to replicate. The argument that Columbus's route mirrored African knowledge is not conspiratorial. It is consistent with the diffusion of seafaring knowledge through commercial exchange. Columbus's dependence on African interpreters and coastal pilots supports this. Montellano's critique is flawed because he is biased, misrepresents his opponent's arguments, ignores important evidence, and demands an unrealistically high standard of proof. The defense of Van Sertima is not a claim of infallibility. It is a call for even-handed, multidisciplinary evaluation. When botanical genetics, cotton DNA, distributional patterns, ethnohistory, early chroniclers, linguistics, loanwords and lingua franca evidence, nautical technology, Luco, Gal, and Moule, ham knowledge, and documentary encounters, Columbus, Bilboa, Estevanico, coincide. We must reassess the fraudulent claims of isolationism. The question is no longer whether contact ever occurred. The more productive queries are: how many voyages, by which peoples, in which centuries, and with what demographic and cultural consequences? The model of impossibility until proven otherwise is no longer tenable in the face of seed, DNA, linguistic trails, and maritime capability. In contrast, Van Sertima's model is a framework that must be considered in all future inquiries on this subject matter.
True as gold, a comma green, we steady on the rise. Digging truth from ancient scenes, we open blinded eyes. Rhyme sharp like pirates' lines, we break the bondage tight. Kamji speaking revolution, keep the fire burning. Chimpy drums guide our stride, we march with purpose proud. No more silence, we collide, our voices thunder loud. Politics and history, we stitch them in every verse. From Pharaoh's throne to Yaoundé streets, we claim the Kamji verse.